Hi, so today I'll be conducting a video essay on my chosen social issue, the problems with utilitarian governments, more specifically of the old German Democratic Republic, otherwise known as the GDR. So the concept of utilitarianism was first created by Jeremy Bentham, who sought to create a new standard of ethical behaviour by promoting the greatest happiness for the greatest number. The main idea of this is that a person should not pursue their own self-interest if this is at the expense of others. In a political philosophy, it bases an individual's rights on the authority of government on a utility, which should be democratic and seek to ensure a broad happiness of society. Socialism is also based on this idea, as it seeks to ensure equality for all. So the GDR can be seen as a utilitarian government as it followed similar ideals as being a socialist country. It first came into being 4 years after the end of the Second World War. During this time, the Federal Republic of Germany was created in the West, and the GDR was established on the other side. East Berlin became the capital of this new country, whilst West Berlin remained part of the Federal Republic of Germany, causing great tension and conflict. 10 years later, 3 million people had emigrated to the West. So in 1961, the Berlin Wall was built to stem this flow of refugees. People found themselves confined to only one side of the city and were only allowed to travel to Eastern Bloc countries. So one issue that was present during the course of the GDR was that of media censorship. A chapter of Dominic Boyer's book provided me with a detailed history and information on how this occurred during the time of the German Democratic Republic and of the Berlin Wall. Boyer makes a great point about how the GDR state tried to embed a single ideology into its people, and as such, any intellectual diversity was not permitted. You were either for or against the government, which is very typical of these sorts of governments. So I would like to go into some history as to how media censorship actually occurred during the time of the GDR. So, media control first began with the GDR restructuring media networks in the 1950s and 60s to guarantee that there would be a centralized communication and organization for the communication of party values across the country. They also prohibited any distribution of news from a non-GDR source. They could then be selective on what info could appear in the GDR media, especially foreign affairs from the West. So there were actually no official censors in their media control, as this would have violated the GDR constitution, which claimed a freedom for the press. It also would have gone against the idea of this government that the party correctly expressed the will of its people, so there should be no need for censorship. I found this interesting to learn as it identified a key problem with these sorts of governments, that they aren't able to show their flaws and shortfalls. So the GDR used the media as a network of their cultural reproduction and to forge pure mass consciousness. They were obsessed with everything being predetermined and planned in advance. There was no such thing as spontaneity, as it simply wasn't allowed. This affected the media as everything had to look good, even if this wasn't the truth with what was actually happening. It was a crazy sense of wishful thinking. So after learning so much about media control from scholarly sources, I'd drawn the conclusion that the GDR was a totalitarian state that had no regard for its people, but rather wanted to be depicted as supreme. So it was really interesting for me to then be able to interview the actual author of the book that I've based a lot of my research on, Dominic Boyer. In our interview, he highlighted that the GDR did have sincere humanitarian approaches in their socialist policies, despite the fact that they were so strict in the measures they went to control their people. Interesting. I then had the pleasure of interviewing Jens, who now lives in Melbourne but experienced the first 17 years of his life living on the east side of the Berlin Wall. He gave me a completely different perspective as to what life was really like living in a utilitarian government, highlighting some good and interesting aspects, which you will see next.